Story 1. At my school, we sometimes have narcotic dogs come and check the lockers. They always announce it like teachers, do not let students leave the classroom for the next bit of time. Everyone knows what it means. And one kid in my class grabbed his bag and jumped over 3 desks and ran out the classroom. Turns out he was an entrepreneur of sorts. Story 2. A physics class in community college. Professor was explaining conservation of angular momentum and had a kid sit on a tall chair that spins. He then had the kid hold 2 books out with extended arms and then spin as fast as he can, before telling the kid to pull the books in close to his chest. Think of a figure skater and how they spin really fast. The kid immediately turns into a blur, and the stool/chair starts to tip slightly until it rockets from under him like it was shot from a slingshot. The kid slams into the floor as if he got choke-slammed, and his head hit the floor in a way that sounded like someone dropped an overly ripe melon. The look on the professor's face said, "Well, that was a good run. I guess I have to find a new career now." Kid turned out okay, and everyone got a laugh, but it genuinely looked like I had just witnessed a death. Story 3. This wasn't my class, but was the talk of the school for quite a while. A well-liked teacher gave her class a free workday and offered to play some music. Upon opening her iTunes, she found a file named transformers.mp4. Curious, she opened it. It turned out to be hardcore porn that blasted through the entire class at full volume. Panicking, she still couldn't figure out how to shut it off, so she ran the laptop, open and still blasting at full volume, down the hallway to the office to reduce exposure to students. It turns out the superintendent's son used one of the shared servers to browse and download the video, so it was accessible by every computer connected to the school network. The superintendent resigned a couple years later. Story 4. In high school physics, we were waiting for the teacher to show up, and another physics teacher from another class comes in with a bowling ball and says, "Do you guys think I can dribble this?" Everyone just kinda looks at him incredulously, and he begins to repeatedly and heavily strong-arm the bowling ball into the floor, hard enough for it to rebound high enough that he can keep the momentum going. People start to laugh, but then after about 5 or 6 bounces, the ball splits in half as it hits the floor. He quickly scoops up the halves, holds a conspiratorial finger to his lips, and shuffles out the door. About 15 seconds later, our physics teacher comes in, looks at the few dusty chips of bowling ball on the floor, and asks, "What was all that noise? What's this mess on the floor?" Story 5. In a full auditorium, a random guy from a higher year entered. He yelled, "Ladies, this one's for you," and then proceeded to take off his shirt and trousers, his boxers still on, luckily. He then flexed his biceps and did different poses in front of hundreds of students sitting there not knowing how to react. He then left, saying, "Sorry to bother you," to the lecturer. Apparently, he bet with his friends to do this for 3 troughs of strong beer. Story 6. Guy with anger issues started yelling at the teacher and then slapped her across the face. Keep in mind, this kid was fat and huge, and the teacher was this old tiny Asian woman. The nicest guy in the class smokes the guy with a sucker right hand and just puts the guy out cold. Story 7. 2 things you need to know. First, there was this guy at my school whom I've known for 25 years. His thing is to scream "F yeah" at everything. He's done it since I've known him. Anytime someone mentions Matt, someone always adds a "F yeah." He's huge and very loud. When he comes in the bar, he announces his presence with an exuberant "F yeah." If he calls you, you say hello, and he yells "F yeah." You get the picture. Second, my senior year, it was a thing to sneak vodka into school in Cinnabon mugs. For some inexplicable reason, plastic Cinnabon mugs were like a huge thing. Everyone walking around flaunting their Cinnabon mugs. Anyway, I'm in a post-lunch class one day, and one of the Cinnabon vodka girls up and starts puking bright hot pink fruity vomit out the window behind her. Then she stood up and screamed, "Woo, F yeah," at the top of her lungs with her face covered in F yeah dude is also in this class, so he immediately screams F yeah back. Then she yells F yeah again, and they go back and forth yelling F yeah, getting progressively louder with each one until the teacher gets to her and ushers her out of the room. The rest of us just sat there like, what the hell was that all about? Story 8. This happened like 2 to 3 semesters ago at my college. I was in finance class, about 10 minutes from it ending. It was around 2:30, and I had to work at 4:30. Planned on hitting the gym between. Typical day, was getting ready to go by drinking my pre-workout in the last 10 minutes of class. Well, it turns out someone had a different plan. We get an email that the school is in a legitimate lockdown. There's a questionable man on campus with a tactical vest and large backpack, walking around the campus. Oh boy. So here's the reactions to this information. 50% of the class immediately panics. No idea what to do, huddles in the corner texting their loved ones. One chick began bawling her eyes out, making all of the noise, even puked in the corner. Sick. Foreign exchange student whips out his laptop and starts a League of Legends game, getting visibly agitated at it in the back of the room. Yasuo, am I right? Teacher breaks a piece of metal off the vent and stands by the door, prepared to, what looks like, kill Julius Caesar. Professor in the adjacent room, connecting door, walks in and explains that we should all calm down because worst case scenario is we die and we get a cool plaque with our name on it in the hallway. This does not help the students already having anxiety. I'm over here, phone dying, absolutely yeeted to crap on pre-workout with the inability to expend this energy, wondering if I'll get fired for a no-call, no-show, and feeling 99% pissed rather than scared. Had this sketchy man come into our room, I'm of the utmost confidence that he would have walked away without harming a single human, simply because it was apparent that God left this classroom long ago, and we were in more hysteria alive than dead. Anyways, 2.5 hours later, I'm able to call my boss after we were allowed to leave, and tell him that there was a kid who was a regular student but got reported because he had a big backpack. There was no vest. The student who reported him had already gotten in trouble for trying to start a racial conflict a week prior, and just had an agenda to push. The amount of pissed I was immeasurable. Story 9. Had a teacher have a little bit of a mental meltdown in class when she realized that no one really cared about doing the homework and such. She was really sad, and I wish I was a better student for her, and I hope her life is going better nowadays. Story 10. Not a student anymore, but we had a supply English teacher that had the good old habit of liking a little drink in the classroom. He used to pull a small bottle of vodka out of the drawer and take a small sip every few minutes while trying to be sly about it. Well, after a while, one of the students told a teacher about it, and then the supply teacher was found on his lunch break watching Netflix and drinking a glass of wine in the classroom. Funny thing is, he stayed on as a teacher for another 3 months before being totally kicked out for a similar thing. Story 11. 9th grade for reference. Everyone was being super loud, so we were pretty much unable to discern anything short of our own table. Just as the teacher is coming in and everyone is quieting down, this one kid is just loudly talking and telling this one girl who looks really uncomfortable, "It's 4 inches," with the most proud voice ever. Some of the guys were bullshitting loudly before class, and one of them said pretty loudly, "Yeah, mine's huge, gigantic, like 6 inches of man meat." The guys he was talking to just kind of gave him a funny look, and one said, "Dude, 6 inches is like average." Saw a kid die on the inside that day. You know it's bad when you exaggerate, and your exaggeration isn't really impressive. Story 12. Freshman year of college, I had one professor who would randomly call on students in class, and if they didn't answer correctly, he would proceed to give them a roast in front of the whole class for their lack of knowledge on the subject material. I was in the class with a few of my good friends, as it was a prerequisite that we all needed to have. Even though we got our fair share of roasting from him as well, we all thought it was funny, and we knew it was his way of making sure the students are engaged in the lecture. About halfway through the semester, he called on one person, and after she incorrectly answered, he started to casually roast this student. At this point, another girl raised her hand to get the professor's attention. After he called on her, she proceeded to vocally berate him about how he was treating us all like children, as well as call him every vulgar word she could think of. At this point, he's shouting back at her too, complete with all the same vulgarities that she used on him. And me and my friends are just sitting in the back laughing under our breath while simultaneously being completely dumbfounded that this kind of stuff actually happens in college. Finally, he yells at her to leave lecture. She obliges, and as soon as she is out of the room, he proceeds to roast her even more to the class. It was so odd to see something like this. especially since I had just come from high school a few months before. Man, college is wild. Story 13. Former student here. This was long ago. We sent whispers around the classroom to all drop our books on the ground, pretending it was by accident, when the clock on the wall hit an exact time. When it happened, our teacher was in the middle of writing on the chalkboard, and she turned around, shocked, to find us all picking up our books. She cried after that, and we all started to feel really bad. Learned later on that she had just had a miscarriage. Sorry, Teach, we didn't know, and we all liked you. Story 14. I went to a small college, and our classroom sizes were very small, 15 to 25 people. So we got to know everyone pretty well. There was this one guy who came in so stoned that he fell off his chair. Thankfully, the professor was relatively chill, so she let him go home. Not my story, but my friend told me how on the first day of class, during introductions and icebreakers, this girl got up and ran toward the door. She didn't make it and threw up all over the place. Looked around her and, completely horrified, left the class. She came back for her stuff later. Also, another time, my professor knew I was turning 21 the night before, and when I came in the next morning, completely hungover and dead, he and the whole class applauded me. It was nice. Story 15. Back in 8th grade middle school, we had this really cool and chill U.S. history teacher. He never raised his voice, and he was pretty laid back about class and work. He taught in a storytelling kind of manner, and I don't ever remember annotating any document in his class. Well, we had that one kid. In this story, I'm going to call him Jim. Jim was always late to class, and he never turned stuff in. He was that one really cringy kid that everyone either hated or pitied. My teacher never really got fed up with him, but would always show his distaste for him in his facial expressions. My teacher normally would pull him aside to talk to him about his tardiness or missing assignments. Jim would always say he would be earlier and do the assignments, but he of course never did. One day, Jim walks in late again. My teacher is about to start teaching when he turns and sees Jim walking in. Well, this time, my teacher wasn't so happy about it. It was the middle of the school year, towards the end, and my teacher must have gotten so fed up with Jim at that point. My teacher yells Jim's name at the top of his lungs. He normally had a boomy voice, but when he yelled, it amplified 100 times over. The ground literally shook when he yelled, and I'm sure they could hear him from downstairs at the other end of the school. Our school wasn't that small either. For the rest of the class period, about 30 minutes, literally everyone was dead silent. We were all still kind of shocked from it. Story 16. I remember being maybe in 2nd grade, and this one kid in our class kept yelling crap through the window at some 10th to 11th grader that was outside. Our window was easy to climb in and out of, as it wasn't placed at a high level from the ground. I guess the dude that was standing outside got annoyed with him and just jumped on the window stool, which was pretty wide, and said something along the lines of, "You kids should not be saying anything like this. I'm older and won't do anything, but someone in this life will at some point if you keep this behavior." Then went back to his friends or whatever like nothing out of the ordinary happened. Our whole class of 2nd graders was shocked. I know it would have been more interesting if I remembered the details, but it happened a long time ago. Story 17. Okay, so this happened a while ago, so I might not have all the details. So I was on the school bus, and we weren't allowed to eat on the bus. So the kids behind me were talking about lunch tomorrow, and one of them said, "Yeah, I can bring bacon." I was hungry, so I said, "Bacon? Who's bringing bacon?" The bus driver overheard me, but didn't know it was me, stopped the bus and yelled, "Bacon? Who has bacon?" Then he walked down the aisle and looked to see who has bacon. It was so funny, but you kinda had to be there. Story 18. First day of school, freshman year in Woodshop. Teacher just finishes showing us a safety video on proper use of how to use a table saw. Then he was about to give a demonstration and said, "Now you're going to see me do things a little differently than how you just saw it being done in the video you just watched. But that's because I'm a professional and I've been doing this for over 30 years. Teacher then proceeded to immediately cut off 3 of his fingers with the saw at the front of the classroom. Blood was spraying everywhere. He was screaming, holding his hand. The guys I was with in the back of the class started laughing, thinking it was a prank. Girl in front of the class projectile vomited. A few of us helped him find his fingers on the floor, went and got the nurse, and someone called an ambulance. They were able to reattach them at the hospital. Wood class was canceled for the rest of the year, and we all took home economics in its place. Story 19. 11th grade AP Bio class. One of my classmates was locally renowned for his nonsense. One day he decided he was just going to leave, and so he walked to the back of the classroom and hopped out the first story window and left, in the middle of class. Same guy, same class. Brought his banjo in one day and had a banjo jam session before class started. Story 20. In the largest lecture hall on campus, there's a large reproduction of George Washington crossing the Delaware hanging above the door. One afternoon during my class in said room, some guy dressed entirely in red, white, and blue with an eagle mask walked in, saluted the painting, and exited. Story 21. No longer a student, but when I was a freshman in high school, there was this guy I knew since middle school who would always get into trouble. Well, one day he told our math teacher that he needed to go to the restroom. Already familiar with his behavior and using the restroom excuse to ditch class, she refused to let him go. He insisted that he had to go, but she refused yet again. Minutes passed, and he told the teacher that if she didn't let him use the restroom, he was going to piss in the trash can. Trying to call his bluff, she told him to go for it. Some of the students didn't think he'd do it and egged him on to do it. He got up from his desk and approached the trash can, which was in the corner right next to the classroom door. He was in the corner for a minute. Then he actually peed in the trash can. The teacher just sat there as it happened, nonchalant-like. I can't remember if he left the class after he pulled it off, since it was years ago. But yeah, it cracks me up thinking about that moment. A bonus I should add about the guy. My best friend knew him well, and were even good friends. He once told me that during our sophomore year, the guy got expelled for breaking the door window off the security office. They chased him and caught up to him at a nearby mall. Story 22. So, in primary school, I was around 11, and we had this system of classes visiting the school's library for about an hour to stimulate you to read books. It worked really well. Once a class is finished, a member of that class could go warn the next class, appointed by the teacher to go to the library. I was appointed to do that, and pretty proud of it. I knocked on the door, opened it, and wanted to say, "Hey, it's your turn to go to the library." But suddenly I was distracted by what was on the blackboard. The word Mediterranean Sea in huge letters. This class was being taught about it. So, yeah, I ended up saying, "Hey, it's your turn to go to the Mediterranean Sea." Bonus. No one in my class found out about it. Extra bonus. The word in our language for library is bibliothèque, but in dialect in those times, we had another word which translates to bookery. And I think bookery would be a nice word for library. Story 23. When I was a sophomore in high school, there was this one day in my French class where we were going over the homework from the day before. The homework that comes from the book is divided into different sections by letter. So section A, section B, and so forth. At one point, going over the assignment, no one was paying any attention to the teacher, and we were just talking to the people around us. She wanted someone to read their answers from the next section, and no one was listening to her. She was getting frustrated at this point, so she raised her voice and said, "I want the D." There were 2 whole seconds of silence followed by everyone busting out laughing. One of those moments that I will never forget. Story 1. My 6th grade class went to the 1964 World's Fair in New York City, and one of the mom chaperones lost Tommy. We couldn't board the bus home until he was found. The chaperone was crying and sobbing. Our teacher was furious, and nearly all the kids were dying laughing. Well past our scheduled departure time, some official with a walkie-talkie told us Tommy was found and that the cops were driving him to our bus. We all cheered and jumped up and down. The adults were relieved. Our school bus was now the only one in the lot. A cop in a golf cart came. The kid was Tommy, but not our Tommy. Everyone gasped. About 10 minutes later, our Tommy showed up, all on his own, eating cotton candy and carrying 3 bags filled with souvenirs. Story 2. There was this nerdy kid that somehow ended up dating the most popular girl in school. And then he got super popular and went to the dance. And he did this crazy dance called the African Anteater Ritual. And everyone else started doing it too. Story 3. In high school, we had an organization called the Dad's Club. They would work the concessions at the football and basketball games, raise money for the school, do charitable events, etc. One day, I went into school and everyone was talking about how one of the dads that volunteered stole $5K from the Dads Club. This was 1987, so that was a lot of money back then. A kid came up to me the next day and asked me if I heard who stole the money. I said no. He said it was my dad. I found out later it was indeed my dad. Story 4. In junior high school, one part of the school was evacuated because of a shark. It was actually a fetal shark preserved in formaldehyde in a glass jar that someone dropped when moving it from one science classroom to another. In high school, we had a near riot. The unlikely cause was a mystery movie being shown that turned out to be some kind of bizarre Monty Python movie. We had paid money to see this and didn't know what to make of it. Story 5. In grammar school, one of the lads, Donnie, found a trap door at the back of the metalwork classroom. He crawled into the space, and we shut the trap door and moved a bench over it. The teacher could not understand where the knocking noises were coming from. When we let Donnie out after 15 minutes, the teacher knew where the cursing was coming from. Story 6. All of the best crazy things came out of shop class. Probably the most notable was when someone was curious what would happen if they put their finger on an industrial belt sander. Answer: lots of blood. There was one time someone got caught with tobacco in his lip. The teacher called him out and told him to open his mouth, but he refused. So the teacher choked him until he spat it out. Oh, and we had a band teacher for 3 years that was known for his outbursts. The biggest of which, he threw a music stand at a student. Story 7. We had a game at lunch called Killer Bee. The object of the game was to catch a frisbee 3 times. Then you got to throw the frisbee. The catch was that there were upwards of 20 other guys out catching. Well, maybe 10 were actually trying to catch. The rest were otherwise occupied. It was like a mosh pit. The crazy part was that I don't remember anyone getting seriously injured, and I'm pretty sure no one actually died. If there are any other guys from the class of 78 reading this, they might be able to verify it. Story 8. Taylor County High School, Taylor County, Florida, 1983 or 4. We caught an armadillo around 5 p.m. on a Sunday. Stuffed it into an old gym bag. Monday, 6:30 a.m. Get on the bus with the gym bag. Lunchtime, 11:30 a.m. That armadillo had been in that bag for over 18 hours. It's North Florida in late August. It's hot, around 90 degrees. Our lunchroom was not big enough to hold all of the students, so there were 2 lunchtimes, but it was still very crowded. The armadillo shot out of the gym bag like a rocket, straight into the crowded room. You could tell where he was by the human wave left behind him. He might have weighed 20 pounds, and one that size has impressive claws. He was going so fast and it was so crowded that hardly anyone saw it, so they had no idea what was running around, bouncing off their legs. It was by far the funniest thing I've seen in my life. The armadillo even managed to escape. He was caught several days later and painted the school colors. Story 9. My Spanish teacher had been looking for a new home for her parrot, and the special education class had expressed interest. Almost everyone sat in front of their lockers in the morning before class. One morning, a parrot flies down the hallway at 7 a.m. Next, the entire special ed class comes full speed down the hall chasing it, happy as clams. The janitor ended up catching it in a set of double doors. Oh, and some guy into the hand dryers, then duct taped the buttons on. Story 10. We had a pep rally before some big homecoming football game. All seems to be going well, except for the bonfire they promised, then canceled. The crowd of about 200 high schoolers all start to notice that there seems to be commotion over at the football shed. Apparently, some staff and faculty had to detain someone in the shed until the police could arrive. Cops come. 2 go in the shed. They come back out looking disheveled and in disbelief. Next time, a larger group of cops goes in. It took 4 officers to get this girl out of there, kicking, screaming, practically foaming at the mouth. And that, kids, was the first time Madison ever did PCP. Story 11. Some people were smoking pot on a balcony. They went inside. It was spring in the Southwest. Hot, dry, and windy, and little did they know that an ember caught on the couch. By the time they came back, the couch was blazing. Security had to throw the flaming couch off the balcony to keep the building from burning down. Story 12. The winter of 1973 snowed. A lot. There were drifts up over second-story windows apparently. This caused a snow day to happen. This being Wisconsin, everyone got hammered drunk. I hear people were jumping out of fourth-floor windows to get out of buildings since the drifts were so high and they were so drunk. All of the alcohol in town was drunk by the students, since the roads were closed and shipments couldn't get in town. We didn't have another snow day until 2010. Wisconsin is awesome. Story 13. 4 kids on my basketball team fried their brains on paint cans and that chemical spray that you use to clean keyboards and electronics. It was weird because it happened before a playoff game. I was team captain, so I had to round up everyone. I found all 4 of them lying on the hotel floor mumbling incoherently. One had his face buried in his vomit, and the other 3 were a blubbering mess. 1 made a full recovery. 2 made slight recoveries. 1 has reverted back to the age of 12 and has been bouncing between group homes and mental hospitals for the last 4 years. Story 14. Home economic room in 10th grade. Some guy was arguing with his ex across the room. All during class we heard them arguing. Teacher was a small elderly lady, so she didn't say anything to them. Girl put on an oven mitt, took the metal grate out of a toaster oven, and went toward the guy like she was gonna burn him with it. Some other guy stepped in front of her to talk her out of it. As soon as he moved out of the way, the guy who was arguing with her threw a microwave across the room at her, hitting her in the face. All hell broke loose in that classroom after that. Story 15. Some kids years ago used to crap in discreet locations and wait until they were found. Like air ducts inside the pipes of the sinks. The dude got creative. Best one I heard was this one. He stole a copy of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, hollowed it out, put crap in it, and returned it. Took the administration like 3 months to realize where the stench was coming from. He was never caught and has gone down in my school's history as the Phantom Pooper. Story 16. University student here. My school's student association ended up headed by some people who were mismanaging pretty much everything, including money. It's also been revealed that some members of the corrupted board have family ties to a previous board member who was found to have mishandled nearly $1 million in association money and was at the time being sued. So there was a big movement on campus to have them ousted and banned from running for elected offices again. Student council meetings were heavily controlled, and some people were kicked out for questioning these people's actions. A vote was held to try and get them out. Group holding the vote sets it for a day in November, and the Student Association announces the date for the vote is in December. People trusted the group holding the vote more, so they got ready to vote on the November date. During the vote, someone released pepper spray inside. Fire alarm was pulled, and the whole building evacuated. Eventually, everyone is let back in. Voting is set to continue. Fire alarm is pulled again. When everyone is back inside, about 30 students take up the responsibility to guard the fire alarms. In the end, the voting was a unanimous decision to get rid of the corrupted board. They are escorted out by security when it's time for them to pack up their stuff in the office. Story 17. It happened during middle school. Mind you guys, this was on a military air base in Germany, so nothing exciting really happened there. At the time, the high schoolers were allowed off campus for lunch. However, the middle schoolers were not. So, being at that rebellious age, many middle schoolers snuck off campus by jumping a fence. Well, during one normal lunch, the intercom goes off asking for some teacher, possibly the principal, to come to the office immediately. They forgot to turn the intercom off after the announcement, and all you heard was screams. What ended up happening is some group of kids decided to jump the fence to go off campus for food. However, one girl was wearing a ring which ended up getting caught on the fence. She ended up de-skinning her finger. Story 18. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had a professor that everyone likes that I'll call Professor X. Anyways, everyone loved Professor X. He was in his early 30s, got along with all the other teachers, and was laid back enough that he would joke around with the students without being awkward about it. About halfway through the first semester, he didn't show up to class. Then the next day, and the next. When we asked our sub about him, her response told us something was wrong. I'm not allowed to talk about it. Immediately after this, we all started asking around and looking for anyone who knew anything. This is what we found out. Professor X and his wife were going through a rough patch in their marriage, to the point where divorce was discussed. X did not want a divorce and thought up a plan to win her back. With the help of 2 seniors, he was going to stage a fake robbery and rescue her. On the day it happened, the seniors got in, duct taped her to a chair, and waited for him to come back. X ended up chasing them off, but the wife got out of the chair and called the cops before X could explain what just happened. I don't get his logic at this point. So, now our city has a manhunt for 2 18-year-old guys, and they had no idea about the marriage problems and were led to believe that it was just a prank. After a couple of hours, both of the kids' parents were able to talk them down and turn themselves in. Professor X went on to run for a bit, but was caught, and last I heard, works in Dillard's. Moral of the story: be wary of any pranks you're involved in when you start duct taping people. Story 19. Okay, take your pick, ranging from tame to, well, not so tame. Can't verify everything, but these are what I heard. Math teacher had an affair with new female teacher, and she was made to quit, not him. Different math teacher threw a paperclip down my top and asked to retrieve it. French assistant, no older than 21, started screwing the 40-plus-year-old teacher she lived with. He rented a room to her, now in a happy relationship. Fat teacher had her lunch stapled to the staff room ceiling by other staff. The same fat teacher was taken for a spin in someone's new Porsche and then couldn't get out. Had to be cut out of it by firemen. 2 girls got stuck in a soundproofed music room for hours after school had finished because the handle had broken off the other side of the door and there was no reception. French teacher got asked to leave after calling a black guy a monkey. Kid brought in a live grenade to school for show and tell. As for rumors versus truth, 1 to 3 I know are true. 4 and 5 were told to me by an ex-member of staff. I was friends with the girls who got stuck in the music room. I spoke to the head teacher about the French teacher leaving, and my boyfriend was in the school at the time the grenade scare happened. As for the chisel incident, I knew the guy who did it. Story 20. Not really at the school, but it's something a student did. We have a rivalry with one of the other schools in town, and years ago it used to be pretty intense. We had people break into our school and vandalize it. Vandalize the big T we have in the front, and brand their mascot into the turf field. It got to the point where a student here with a pilot's license took his dad's plane and TP'd the entire rival school and the neighborhood around it. Last summer, a student climbed on top of the school and kicked an air vent in. He wound up in the auditorium loft where we keep the old sets and props for drama. He signed his name in the dust on a chair and jumped down onto the stage. He left a few flash drives laying around, broke into a, thankfully empty, locked cabinet in the sound booth, and broke into the paint cabinet. Then he tagged the loading dock doors and left the auditorium. He went to the choir room and on the floor, then went into the band hall and broke through the door there. Story 21. I had a teacher a few years ago, let's call him Mr. R, who was quite serious most of the time, but occasionally could be laid back. One day, one of the boys, let's call him Mark, was asking all these unrelated questions to the lesson to try and get Mr. R off topic. I guess he decided that, as he wouldn't stop, so he'd answer Mark. Mark asked him what fire looked like, and in response, Mr. R started dancing around and then rolling on the floor saying, "I'm a fire, wee!" and other fire-like noises. It got recorded and put on YouTube, and he got fired the next week, so we all thought he was fired for inappropriate behavior or something. Story 22. In my senior year, my entire senior class came in one day, all riding Razor scooters at once. So we had over 500 people riding on scooters in the hallway at once. Some people would scoot by really fast and knock them over. I do remember being in the front of the pack as we entered the school. Some guy in front of me had the worst thing happen to him. A teacher came running out of the door and saw all of us coming in, and on pure instinct, the teacher clotheslines the guy like 5 feet in front of me. Story 23.
We had this thing where the entire junior and senior class was brought out to the football field, where some firemen had positioned two horribly mangled cars. A bunch of drama students from our school got in the cars and pretended they had just crashed. They landed a helicopter on the field and had fire trucks and ambulances come in and take the kids and stuff. Pretty intense. The best part was that it was televised the next day. They were talking about how the students were so surprised and shocked by everything, and showed a picture of the local dealerinos at our school with his mouth open slightly, honestly looking pretty bored. The situation was pretty fun, and the guy got busted last year, I think. Story 24. When I was in college, some of our dorm supervisors decided to have an Easter egg hunt. My room was right next to a supervisor's office, so I learned that this would be happening. I also learned that some of the prizes would be really nice. So on the day of the Easter egg hunt, instead of going to dinner with everyone else, me and 3 of my friends stayed in our dorm and watched where the eggs would be placed. Then my friend had this great idea to write out little notes to place inside of the eggs once we had removed the contents. Once the supervisors went in to dinner with everyone else, we went around and collected the eggs and replaced them with notes. Then returned to our dorm to watch and go through the prizes. When the first people started finding eggs, the effect was amassing. We could see the people bringing the notes back to the supervisors. They looked more and more confused with each one. The notes said things like, "You snooze, you lose," or "Too late, sucker," or other things like that. Story 25. I went to private school. Had 2 other private schools come to campus for some religious event. Other kids decide to start fights, water bottles flying everywhere. Like 500 to 600 kids just throwing water bottles willy-nilly into the air. Saw a teacher just get clocked in the face with a mostly full bottle. Did not know what was happening. Bunch of AP kids decided to bully 2 other AP kids. One guy's parents' car got covered in cat food, ruined the paint job. The other got a watermelon full of plastic utensils and an M80 blown up on their lawn. This did go to court, and I believe a settlement was reached. Story 26. In German class, in year 7, we had an incredibly irritating and stupid teacher. One day, we had a room change, but the notice fell off the door, so the entire class was sitting in the room with nothing to do. The classroom had 2 doors, one on the outside and one leading to an inside corridor. We got all of the tables and chairs and barricaded the inner door like there was a zombie apocalypse. The teacher took 45 minutes to realize that maybe the students were in the other room. He tried to take down the inner entry but could not get in. He then took another 10 minutes to walk 12 meters to the other door. We all got detention, but it was hilarious. Story 27. It became a fad to carry a screwdriver and unscrew every screw. This was high school. It resulted in an assembly and the principal yelling at us, saying how he tried to open doors but the handle would come off, as well as other things.